So without any further ado, it's my great pleasure to introduce Chief Rabbi Mirvis to speak about the Omer, Zionism and Anti-Semitism.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much, Chazan Yossi, for your lovely warm words of welcome. Congratulations to you and to Miriam for creating the idea of Engage, for preparing it, and for the launch this evening. And kol hakavod, yeshakar, for everything that you are doing here. And I extend to you both continuous bracha v'hatzlacha. May you have blessing and success in all of your future endeavors. Also lovely this evening to be in the presence of your chairman, Stephen Roston, various honorary officers of the community, and I know that Rabbi Selaznik is going to be walking in soon. He's had some shiva calls to make. And it's truly lovely for me to be in your presence, to pay this return visit to Bushey. You certainly are one of our star communities, and I already know what the two next occasions will be when I'll be coming to this community. For Rabbi Selaznik's farewell, and for the induction of your new rabbi, whenever that might be. So it's lovely that we have these opportunities for me to engage with you. And I had the pleasure of the beloved Malka, and of course on Mitzvah Day I came to see one of your projects, which was really tremendous. And thank you for being such a marvelous community. As Chazan Yossi pointed out, I have identified education as being one of the cornerstones of the future life of our community. And often we make the mistake of identifying education as being purely related to children, but that's not the case. What's the greatest compliment you can pay to an outstanding rabbi? You say he's a Talmid Chacham, meaning a clever student. The most renowned rabbi in the entire world. Oh, what a Talmid Chacham he is. Because whoever you are, you're always a Talmid or a Talmidah. We continue learning. That's the nature of our people, and it's thanks to our learning that we are able to personally grow, and as a nation, we are able to survive and to move forward. And that's why I was so delighted to hear about this particular program. Any ambitious adult education program for our communities is music to my ears, and that's why I was delighted to accept the kind invitation to launch the program with you this evening. And you know, this building has three names. Beit Tfilah, which is a house of prayer, Beit HaKnesset, synagogue, which is a house of meeting, and Shul, from the German, which means school. Meaning that in a shul, we need to daven, we need to socialize, and also we need to learn. And it's quite remarkable how everything is done in Bushey in one and the same hall. This is where you daven, this is where you socialize, this is where you're learning, and it's the shul part. Isn't it significant that the one term that we use out of the three, colloquially, is shul? The school, the learning aspect of it, because that is so central to us. And thanks to Engage, you will indeed have an additional opportunity to all the others that exist to learn through your community about your Jewish roots. Our subject this evening is the Omer, Zionism and Anti-Semitism. We're currently in the Omer period. It's a very sad period. It's an entire month of public Jewish mourning. And why do we mourn at this time? According to our tradition, it's because the 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva perished at this time of the year. It was the year 135 of the Common Era, 65 years after the destruction of the Second Temple. Bar Kokhba led a revolt against the Romans. His aim was to overpower them, to return back to Jerusalem, and to build a third temple. The opportunity was clearly there. However, during the war that ensued, his entire army which was made up of the students of Rabbi Akiva, fell at the hands of the Romans. There was one day of respite, that was Lag BaOmer. But apart from that, it was a tragic period. And my question to you is, yes, it was tragic. But why do we consider it to be more tragic than other tragedies? After all, as a nation, we have suffered on so many numerous occasions. Why was this tragedy identified as being the one for which, for 1/12 of the year, no weddings, no haircuts, no public entertainment? What was so bad about this one? And I'd like to suggest that the answer is that we didn't learn from our mistakes. We didn't learn from history. The second temple fell because of the sin of sinat chinam, causeless hatred, while the Romans had laid siege to Jerusalem. Inside the walls of the city, we had enough provisions to last for 21 years. Yet, there was a civil war that was raging. Jew pitted against Jew. And there were Jewish guerrillas who would knife their fellow Jews. And in their midst there were those who set fire to all the storehouses of the provisions. The result, therefore, is that the Romans found it very easy to breach those walls and to conquer the city. 65 years later, we can identify with that period of time because we're now just a bit longer after the Second World War, which suggests that at the time of the Bar Kokhba revolt there were people who had experienced the destruction. They knew what it was like to have a temple. They were aware acutely of the reasons behind the downfall. And yet the Talmud tells us that the students of Rabbi Akiva, those soldiers of Bar Kokhba, were exceptionally knowledgeable in Torah, but they didn't treat each other with dignity, with respect, and with honor. They hadn't learned the lessons of 2 generations before. And because they were split and splintered, the result is there was no unity, and once again they fell before the Romans. I love the logo of Engage. It's 2 people holding hands or shaking hands. And this reminds me of the origin of the Hebrew word for hand. So hand is yad. So the reason why hand is yad is that in a hand you've got 14 joints, 3 in each finger and 2 in the thumb. 14 in Hebrew lettering is Yud Dalet. And Yud Dalet spells yad. So that's the reason. It's not just a gimmicky idea. This is the actual reason behind the Hebrew word for yad, the 14 joints. And when you have 2 hands together, holding hands or shaking hands, you've got Yud Dalet and Yud Dalet, 2 yads. That spells the Hebrew word Yedid, Yud Dalet, Yud Dalet. Yedid is the Hebrew word for friend, because you have friendship when you've got the holding of hands. And a Yedid is 14 plus 14, which is 28, and 28 in Hebrew lettering is Kafchet, which spells Koach, strength. So the source of strength is Yedidut. We are strongest when there is friendship, when there is unity. However, when we are divided, then we are exceptionally weak. I would suggest that this is the reason why Leicester City have just won the Premier Division. They haven't got world-class players. They haven't got a history of incredible success, but they've got Achdus. They've got koach. Their koach comes from their unity. They play like a team. They're totally loyal. In the changing room, they say it, not that I've been there, they say they're just like one single person. As the Gemara says, Ke'ish echad, belev echad, like one person with one love. That's the secret to their success. But when they're playing against other more famous teams, more classy teams, because they don't play like teams, there's no team spirit in their midst, they're able to beat them. So we suffered during this time of the year at the hands of the Romans because we were divided. So it's so crucially important to have that achdus, to have that unity. And I am constantly amazed and disturbed at the extent to which, nearly 2,000 years later, we as a Jewish people still haven't learnt that lesson from our history. It's remarkable when, sadly, during tragic times, we have the capacity to come together in unity. Is that Rabbi Selesnik? Rabbi Selesnik, good evening. Shalom Aleichem. Is Judy with him? Okay. So you thought you would kind of hide there at the back. But so may I just pause to pay compliment to Rabbi Mirvis and Selesnik, who, as you know, have been legendary leaders of this community and who are engaged in such a remarkable way at a pastoral level, and that's why they're juggling all these balls. On this evening, Shiva House, Engage evening and so on, we'll have more opportunity at their official farewell. But we don't really want to say goodbye to Rabbi Selesnik, but he's leaving, what can we do about it? And so lovely to see you here this evening. Now what was I talking about? Oh yeah, we haven't learned from our lessons of the past. You will recall that terrible situation 2 summers ago when the 3 boys in Israel were kidnapped, and for 18 long days we were davening around the world. Unfortunately, we didn't know at the time that they were already dead. But weren't those remarkable days when Jewish people, regardless of levels of religiosity, ethnicity, geographical location, we felt the power of unity throughout the Jewish world. And then we found out the sadness of what had transpired, and it took just a few weeks and we were back to our infighting, backstabbing, and it's sad, it's tragic. And that's why as Chief Rabbi I will continuously, never tire from highlighting the importance of unity. Unity in our community between other strands of Judaism. We have to work together, because hand in hand, that will be the source of our koyach in the future. With all sad times, we know that the Almighty is with us. As we say in the Psalms, Imo Anochi v'tzara, He is with us throughout sorrows, through all of our sorrow. And I'd like to share with you a story which is based on a Kabbalistic text. I'm going to modernize the story because for me it is so hugely powerful, because it shows us how God is with us in our sorrow. In times of sorrows, He walks with us. Sometimes He carries us in His arms, individually, as families, and as a nation, so that we can survive and prevail. So this is how the story goes. A man lived a full life. He passed away, he came into heaven. And when he arrived, he saw that up in those celestial spheres, there was a road. And there was a signpost with an arrow. And the signpost read, Beit Din Shalmana, the heavenly supreme court. And he thought to himself, yeah, it makes sense. I've lived a full life. And now I need to be accountable for my deeds. So he started walking on the road towards what he expected would be the heavenly supreme court. He's walking along and he hears a sound behind him. He turns around and there's a truck coming towards him. The truck's coming towards him. He stops. The driver stops. He says to the driver, where are you going to? The driver says, I'm going to your trial. He says, oh. He says, tell me, what are all those bags in your truck? He says, those are bags of all of your sins, all of your averas. He says, oh my gosh. He says, could you give me a lift, please? The driver says, I'm sorry, can't you see? This truck is absolutely full of these bags. Even here on the passenger seat, it's got all these bags. I'm sorry. And off he drives. This fellow's walking along and he's thinking to himself, oy vey. I shouldn't have performed all those averas, all those sins, all those temptations. Oh my gosh. He's walking along and now he hears another sound. He turns around, there's a car coming towards him. Waves the car down, driver rolls down the window. He says to the driver, where are you going to? The driver says, I'm going to your trial. He says, oh. He says, what are those bags on the back seat? He said, those are bags of all of your mitzvahs, all your good deeds. He says to him, tell me, can you give me a lift, please? The driver says, sure, with pleasure. Come sit down, lots of space. He sits down, the driver starts driving, and now he's schwitzing. Boy, am I in trouble. He's driving along, and then eventually he sees this large building ahead of him. And there's a car park outside. And he can see that the truck driver is schlepping the bags of all the Averas off the truck. He runs into the building, and there he sees an amazing sight. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the heavenly Holy One, blessed be He, is sitting, presiding over that court of law. And in the middle of this large hall is a large pair of weighing scales. And he can see that God has motioned to the truck driver to take all his bags and to put them on the pan on one side. So he's putting bag after bag after bag. And the pan is all the way down there, bag after bag. Whoa, it's just totally weighed down. Comes to the last bag. And then God motions to the car driver. He says, okay, now it's your turn. He has to get a step ladder in order to climb up to that pan way on the other side. And he's only got a few bags. Bag, and he slips up another bag and another bag. God says, is that your last bag? He says, yes. And then suddenly, there's another sound from outside. The man runs outside to the car park, and he sees there's another truck. He runs up to the truck driver, and he says, what have you got in your truck? He says, I've got all the bags of your tzoros. He says, oh. Truck driver comes inside. God says to him, take those bags of the tzoros and put them on the side of the mitzvahs, all the good deeds. So he starts to put bag after bag after bag. Oh, it's coming down a bit. And another bag and another bag. Oh, it's starting to even up. And another bag. It's nearly even. He's got 3 bags to go. And then 2 bags. And he comes to the last bag. It's nearly there. And this guy's schwitzing. What's going to happen? What's going to happen? And it's 1 more bag. And it's an absolute tie. It is equal. 50-50. And the fellow shouts out to God and he says, God, why didn't you give me more tzoros? So, what we learn from this Kabbalistic story is we are accountable before the Almighty. There's nowhere to hide, not in this world and not in the world to come. Number 2, life continues beyond the grave. Our neshamas live forever. And number 3, God is with us in our sorrow. And if we suffer a lot and have all kinds of challenges, it will be evened out. If not here, then in the world to come. God's with us. And He will bless us. And He notices the extent of our challenges. And everybody's got challenges. Huge challenges. You wouldn't know what kind of challenges others have. Behind closed doors, what they endure in their own way. God notices, He's with us, and He'll remember our tzoros. And we, in the future time, will definitely be rewarded. And speaking about being rewarded, isn't it amazing how the saddest month of the year has been transformed almost into our happiest month of the year? That in living memory, 2 new festivals have been added to the calendar. Yom Ha'atzmaut and Yom Yerushalayim, and both of them are right inside the Omer. Fulfilling what the prophets told us, that in time to come, God will transform sorrow to joy for us. And I find that at this time of the year, the Sedras of the week speak a lot about the significance of the land of Israel and of Jerusalem, the heart of our nation, where we are anchored spiritually. And as far as Israel is concerned, Israel is also associated with a lot of tzoros. The tzoros of the Shoah, which preceded it, and the challenges that we've had in Israel since the establishment of the state. There is a remarkable midrash in the Yalkut Shimoni, which is an anthology of midrashim put together in the 2nd century. This is how the midrash goes. And just think of it, 2nd century. It tells the story of a father and his son who were going on a long journey. The son walking next to his father. And at one point the son turns to his father and he says, these are the words in the midrash, Abba, heichan hi hamadina. Father, where is the city? Where is our destination? It's the ancient way of saying, are we there yet? And the father replies to the son. And he says, Beni, teitalach. My son, I would like you to know, Kasher tir'eh et beit hakvarot, hamedina kroiva lach. When you see the cemetery, we'll be close to the city. Because that's how it is. Cemeteries are on the outskirts of cities. So he gave him a sign. When you come to the cemetery, you'll be nearly there. Now, the fascinating aspect of this midrash is the term that is used for a city. Usually it's Ir, or Ayara, or Kfar. This is the only time in rabbinic literature that city is called Medina. The child said, Heichan hi ha-Medina. Where's the Medina, the state? And surely, therefore, this is a rabbinic description written some 1,900 years ago about the journey of our people, ever since the year 70 when our temple was destroyed. We went on a journey, praying continuously, V'techazena Einenu, God, return us to Zion. And throughout the centuries, we turned heavenwards and we said, Almighty God, our Father, Heichan hi ha-Medina. Where is our own country? When are we going to return to Zion? When will we have autonomy in our own land? And God gave us a sign. When we saw the cemeteries, the largest cemeteries that have ever existed on the face of the earth, in Auschwitz and Birkenau and Belsen and Buchenwald, we were nearly there. We were only 3 years away, from 45 to 48. I'm not suggesting that the reason for the Shoah was the establishment of the State of Israel, because I genuinely believe that nobody should have the chutzpah to try to explain the Shoah. So unprecedented and so enormous was the tragedy of the Shoah. God alone knows why it was necessary. But certainly a consequence of the Shoah was the establishment of the State of Israel. Once we as a nation passed through those cemeteries, we were nearly there. And isn't it absolutely amazing how with sweat, blood and tears we created the state, we've maintained the state. Isn't it incredible, you know, that Israel is ranked 11th in the world. There was a happiness index survey conducted in all 195 countries in the world to determine the happiest countries in the world. Israel came 11th. Isn't that amazing? A country where you never know when the next bomb might be, God forbid, or when the next shell will be fired from this way direction or the other. We're at ease, we have peace of mind, we have confidence, we have faith in God, and we have the uncanny capacity to continue to successfully fight to protect ourselves and to guarantee our survival in our land. So there's so much to celebrate, and we recognize that Yom Ha'atzmaut is at the sad time of the year because it is through sadness that we emerged to celebrate the existence of Medinat Yisrael. And if one wants a symbol of Israel, it is certainly Yerushalayim, and we're going to be celebrating Yom Yerushalayim next Sunday. And I'll pose this question to you. How is it possible that Yerushalayim was chosen as a capital city? First of Yehudah, the state of Judea, and afterwards of Israel. It's unique as a capital city. In fact, I would suggest it's the only capital city of the world which doesn't tick one single box that is required for a city to be a capital city. First of all, to be a capital city, the place needs to be accessible. People can reach it. Number two, it needs to be an area where there can be successful commercial activity. In order to have commercial activity, you need roads, you need at least one major river passing through, or perhaps it should be on the coastline, and there should be a major port. Jerusalem has nothing of that. In ancient times, the way of the sea went from Egypt up to Lebanon. The King's Highway from Saudi Arabia of today up to Damascus. Jerusalem's up in the hills and the mountains. The only reason you would land there is if you verblonzed there. Nobody went there. And on top of that, there's no water there. It's the only city in the world that exists without a natural source of water. No river. If you've ever been in Yerushalayim on Rosh Hashanah and you've wanted to pray the Tashlich prayer, you've got a challenge. There's no river. So what do people do in Jerusalem? They stand on the Mount of Olives from where You think on a clear day you can see the Dead Sea. Or in the Shire Chesed neighborhood, there are some ancient wells, and they lift up the manhole covers and they say Tashlik there. Or they go to the Shiloach spring just outside the old city. But there's no river. And therefore, there's been an ongoing challenge in Jerusalem for the citizens to live from day to day. So how did Jerusalem become the capital? The answer is in Psalm 132. Ki vachar Hashem b'Tzion, iva lemoshav lo. The Lord has chosen Zion as a place for His habitation. It's because of the spiritual properties of Yerushalayim, and we all know about that. You feel ruchnis, spirituality. You feel the presence of Hashem in Yerushalayim more than in any other place on earth. That's why Yerushalayim has always been and will always be our capital city. It ticks the most important box to be the capital city of the Jewish people. And now let me pose this question to you. Why is it that Yerushalayim is mispronounced in every language on earth except for Hebrew? It should be Jerusalem, Yerushalayim, and so on. What happened to the ayim of Yerushalayim? Why is it not recognized? Why are we the only people who recognize the ayim part? And what does this ayim represent? So traditionally, the way we describe the ayim is, it's a word in the dual form, such as einayim and ktefayim and birkayim. Whatever you've got two of, it's ayim. And you know that there are two Jerusalems. Yerushalayim Shamala and Yerushalayim Shamata. Jerusalem above and Jerusalem below. The heavenly Jerusalem and the earthly Jerusalem. It's in Jerusalem that heaven meets earth. And that's why Yerushalayim is the central sorting office of Jewish prayers. This is how I explain why we daven towards Jerusalem. It's the way the Royal Mail works. If I post a letter to my neighbor, and I put it in a letterbox, it first has to go to the central sorting office. There it'll be sorted out. And from there, a postman will come and drop it into my neighbor's letterbox. Wherever the letters go to the world, it has to go through the central sorting office. That is what Yerushalayim is. It's the central sorting office of our prayers. From all over the world, they come to Yerushalayim. And because heaven meets earth there, from Yerushalayim below, it goes to Yerushalayim above. So central is Yerushalayim for us. But I'd actually like to suggest a different reason for the ayim, which is actually deeper. You see, there are three words, and Yerushalayim will be the fourth. Let's see if you know what the three words are in Hebrew, which have no singular. Even if you say a tiny bit of this phenomenon, it's always in the plural. What are the three words?
Mayim.
Mayim, wonderful, water. Okay? So one single drop of water is mayim, it's waters. There is no singular for water, because when you look out at the seas, the horizon is never ending. Another word?
Shemayim.
Shamayim, fantastic, the heavens. Similarly, when you look at the skies, they're never ending. And by the way, the word for heaven is shamayim. There is water, because there's water up in the heavens. Third word, which is an amazing word, which never has a singular. You all know it. Chaim, fantastic! Life, brilliant community. Okay. 1 nanosecond of life is chayim. It's in the plural. Now don't tell me there's a word chai, that's a verb. Chai means he lives. It's not life. Life is always chayim. And that's so reassuring for us, because life never ends. You know, at the grave time, they think it's all over, to take a footballing term, but it's not over. The life of the neshama, of the soul, is chayim, it's continuous. So I'd like to suggest that Yerushalayim likewise is in the plural, because it is the eternal capital of the Jewish people. At the time of the destruction of the temple, they thought it was all over. The Romans plowed the city as if to erect a matzeva there to say, here lies the Jewish capital that once existed. But that's not the case. It's Yerushalayim. Other peoples came and they went, but it's always been ours, because God chose it as our capital city. And that's why we have got it back in our time. And perhaps there has been a reluctance amongst other peoples to acknowledge the centrality of Jerusalem in our tradition. And we have it to this day. The vast majority of peoples, of nations in this world, have their embassy in Tel Aviv. What an affront to the people of Israel. It's like nearly every other country having its embassy in Manchester or Birmingham and not recognizing London as the capital of Great Britain. How would the British people take to that? So to this very day, there is sensitivity relating to Yerushalayim being our capital. Why? Because it's linked to faith. And that's where I see a connection between Zionism and anti-Semitism, because Yerushalayim is Zion. And our connection with Yerushalayim goes back to the time when God created Zion. When Abraham and Sarah accepted the one true God, the first mitzvah given to them was Lech Lecha, go and live in the Holy Land. Be rooted in Zion. And ever since that time, in our davening, in our consciousness, our entire Bible is centered and anchored in Israel, because it is the center of our universe. Unfortunately, some are reluctant to acknowledge that connection between Zionism and Judaism. So, in this week's Sedra, God's going to give us the tochacha, curses. And God's going to say, if it comes to pass that we do not fulfill our obligations as a nation, some awful things might happen to us. And then God says, even though the Jewish nation might be dispersed and exiled and ruled by others and persecuted, nonetheless, God says, I will never destroy the Jewish nation. And then God goes on to say, and I will remember the land. It's this week's parasha. The result, therefore, is, as the prophet Isaiah said, Atem Edai Ne'um Hashem. The Jewish people are the greatest proof of the existence of God. We are evidence of the truth of the one true God. Because how else would you explain the fact that at this very moment, after everything we've gone through in millennia, all that persecution, in exile, with so many times people trying to annihilate us, right now we're sitting here in Bushey Shul, loyal to the Torah that was given at Mount Sinai. How can you explain it, that we're alive and we're thriving around the world? It's because in that Torah, that's where the answer is. God says, I will never destroy you. You will always remain alive. So that's why sometimes there are people in the world who resent our existence in the world, because our existence is a threat to what they believe in. And sometimes people resent the existence of the Jewish state of Israel, because the existence of the Jewish state of Israel is proof of the one true God, who promised that one of the greatest miracles of all time would happen when after close to 2,000 years we would return back to our country and have it in our hands again. So that is why today we're suffering from a plague of anti-Zionism. Please don't misunderstand me. I don't think any of us should ever suggest that every person who criticizes the policies of a particular Israeli government is an anti-Semite. That's simply not true. In fact, the majority of the critics of the Israeli government are to be found in Israel. It's a vibrant democracy. We have strong views about the Israeli government. Okay, but sometimes anti-Zionism is clearly a strong form of anti-Semitism. And modern-day anti-Zionism suggests that we, the Jewish people, like all other nations on earth, have the right to self-determination in our own country within secure borders. If you don't accept that notion and you consider yourself to be an anti-Zionist, I'm sorry, you've got something against us, the Jewish people. Anti-Zionism, therefore, is clearly anti-Judaism. It is part of Jew hatred. And there is this vile new term, Zio, which is being used on campuses and in other places. And all you have to do is to replace it with the word Jew, because that's really what it is about. And my guess is that some people who use the term actually don't fully know what they are saying. And those who do know, I think it's regrettable that there is such anti-Semitism that exists. So I've spoken about the Omer, I've spoken about Zionism, and now let's say a few words about anti-Semitism. Sadly, we acknowledge that there has been an increase in anti-Semitism on the continent and the UK. I don't need to tell you about it. But I don't believe we should be alarmed about it. I believe we should see it in its right context. It is serious, and we need to be alert and vigilant. At the same time, we are blessed in this country to be living within a free society, to have the opportunity to openly express our Judaism, our Jewish faith, as Jews, to be involved in every possible discipline and area of activity. It's a wonderful society. We're blessed to be part of Britain and to be British. And Baruch Hashem, in this country, anti-Semitism is not seen exclusively as a Jewish problem, but rather as a threat to all of our society. It is acknowledged that it starts with the Jews, God forbid, and it inevitably spreads to others. And therefore the fight against anti-Semitism is not being left exclusively in our hands, but rather it's a fight which is being fought from the government downwards. And I must tell you that in the midst of the past 1.5 months or so, since Pesach time, when we were fed stories of details relating to senior members of the Labour Party, it's been a trying time for us, and it continues to be. But I actually have drawn a lot of encouragement. Why do I say that? I've drawn encouragement because around the country there is huge support for the Jewish community. There's a large outcry against the notion of anti-Semitism existing, potentially or possibly within any political party and within our society. Our society is clearly on our side, and I see it and I hear it at the highest levels of leadership throughout all the dimensions of British society. And I'm also seeing it within religious circles. I mentioned before, with regard to anti-Semitism, the connection that exists to Jewish faith. And if one is looking for a reason why the longest hatred exists, you can write doctoral theses, there are many long books about it, but no one can escape the reality of the fact that it's largely connected to faith. It is a religious hatred. And I've seen some amazing things within religious circles. Perhaps one of the greatest days I spent with my wife Valerie was the 3rd of September last year, when we were in the Vatican and I had an audience with Pope Francis. And it wasn't just the meeting with the Pope himself and having the opportunity to converse very warmly and in such a beautifully friendly way with him, but our entire experience throughout the day with the cardinals, with the people running the Vatican, in the various departments, was very special, because what we sensed was that warmth towards Jews and Judaism is palpable, it's real, and it's genuine. And last year, we celebrated the 50th anniversary of Nostra Aetate. It's the anniversary of a U-turn within the Catholic Church, through which the Church officially rewrote its religious dogma, turned its back on the notion of deicide, that the Jews killed Jesus, and acknowledged the centrality of the land of Israel within Jewish tradition and religion. And what I therefore have witnessed at close hand is the extent to which it is possible to make U-turns. It's possible for great faiths to acknowledge how changes can be made in order to preserve peace on earth. And that example of Nostra Aetate certainly is an outstanding example which can and must be used within relationships that we have with other faiths. And in the same way as I have been referring to Achdus, which provides koach, togetherness, unity within the Jewish people, which gives us our strength, that is a lesson that shouldn't be lost within other faith circles. And the elephant in the room, of course, is Islam. And what we need to identify and to let people know is that the threat to the world that comes from Islam is not only between Islam and other peoples, but it's primarily within Islam itself. The silent majority of the members of Islamic faith are wonderful people. They are moderates. I come across them all the time. They are clearly not the majority. But the silent majority needs to be more vocal. And primarily the greatest threat is Muslim versus Muslim. And they need to be encouraged to sort out the differences they have within their own circles. We can't sort it out for them. And therefore, we need to highlight the importance of actus of unity within all faiths and between one faith and another. By nature, I'm an optimistic person. And I am hopeful within these trying and challenging times, even with the threat of terrorism. And the reason why I'm hopeful is because I come across so many remarkable examples of wonderful humanity. Another very precious moment I had was last year on the 11th of January. You'll remember the Charlie Hebdo terrible terrorist attack, and then on Friday there was the attack on the kosher supermarket in Paris. Motzei Shabbos, we found out what had happened, and that Motzei Shabbos I decided I'm going to Paris. The next day there was going to be that march, 4 million people in the streets of Paris. Motzei Shabbos I called my friend Rabbi Chaim Corsia, the chief rabbi of France. I said to him I was thinking of catching the first Eurorail train the next morning. He said, please come with me and spend the whole day with me. And that's what I did. And I was with him in the march, and then I accompanied him to a service on that Sunday evening in the great synagogue on the Rue de l'Artois in Paris, and I participated in leading that service. Another incredible experience. But why am I sharing this with you? There was about a 10-minute period which I will never forget. We were part of a VIP section heading that march. And at a certain point, everybody else went off to a large public square, and we were taken off for a 10-minute walk towards certain coaches to take us to wherever we were going. So we walked for 10 minutes along this main thoroughfare, thousands of people lining the road on all sides. And I was walking with the chief rabbi of France, just the two of us together. There was a group ahead of us and a group behind. And as we walked, there were ongoing cheers, people shouting, shalom, 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 and words in French which I don't understand, but which I was told was, we're with you, Jewish people. We love you, Jewish people. And this is France. This is the France that everybody denounces. This is the France where they say there's the worst anti-Semitism. But I was walking in the heart of France, and I heard those cries of solidarity with our people at that time. This is not a black and white issue, it's complex. And sure enough, I don't want to minimize the levels of anti-Semitism that exist. They are worrying, and we need to confront them. But at the same time, I draw huge comfort from the wonderful people I see, from the strength of relationships that exist, and from the leadership of this country, which is absolutely determined to guarantee that we will resolve the anti-Semitism issue.